Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us for episode 5 of our monthly GSS Jamaica Industry Hour podcast. I'm Marjorie Straw, Program Director for the GSS Project, and today we'll be focusing on the topic IT outsourcing and investment for the future. We'll dive in and explore what ITO is, the current landscape in Jamaica, and the opportunities in this GSS segment for the future. Joining me in the discussion today are my special guests, Egbert von Frankenberg and Jaime Vergara. Originally from Berlin, Germany, Egbert has lived and worked in Jamaica for over 10 years. He's the CEO and founder of Knightfox App Design Limited, born out of the need to provide quality software to the Caribbean and its international clients. Knightfox App Design has been focusing on delivering cloud solutions in high-impact sectors such as mobile, machine learning, AI bots, and blockchain. In addition, Egbert was recently appointed as chairman of the Global Services Sector Skills Council. Also with us, Jaime Vergara, currently the Senior Vice President of Operations at Ibex Global, where he leads the strategic planning and execution of multi-site operations in Central America, Latin America, as well as the Philippines, with over 10,000 team members. Egbert and Jaime, thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
All right, great, gentlemen. Well, let's get right into the topic. You know, has always been such an interesting segment. I think it's one of the most attractive segments that we've had where one can see growth in technical areas. But perhaps let's start with a definition. Egbert, how would you define ITO?
Well, ITO for us, it means that there's more and more complicated processes that are becoming part of any business operation with the advancement of technology. And it makes, for a lot of companies, it becomes too costly to actually constantly try and have in-house operations that are able to constantly be on the verge of technology and implement new strategies that allow their operations to become more efficient through technology. So a lot of times IT outsourcing then becomes the go-to solution for companies to find specialists that are able to assist them with their transformation processes.
Thank you, Egbert. And to just expand a little, I'm thinking let's look back at how ITO was 5 years ago. Egbert, how would you describe the IT sector in Jamaica then?
Well, 5 years ago, our sector was still very much geared towards more of a networking environment and secure networking. And it's basically a lot of the tertiary graduates were still focusing a lot on would be required to set up networking technologies in banks, insurance companies, and now that has shifted because with the introduction of cloud, a lot of these kind of jobs are no longer necessary in all these operations. And so, of course, then there has been a shift in the tertiary education where more and more students in the computer science degree moved from the networking engineering side to the software development side. And so we have seen an increase in the output of software developers over the last 5 years.
Thank you, Egbert. Jaime, from your perspective, how is the ITO space, and what kinds of skills do operations such as Ibex needed then compared to now?
Sure, absolutely. So the way we look at ITO is really divided into 3 segments, right? We have our augment segment, which is temporary needs that companies have to help cover their requirement. And nowadays, especially with the current macroeconomic environment where there's a very hard push towards cost reduction, prioritization of services and skills, and then, of course, the major talent hiring issues that they're having in the US and European markets that they're looking to outsource more. And those are usually on a temporary basis. I've got a very defined skill set. I can't cover it right now. I'm going to hire you so that you find this person for me. They do the job that I require, and then I pay you for that service, right? Then we have our managed services. We look at that as a little bit different. Basically, they hire us to create a team that's going to support their leader with their initiative, their strategy, their tools development, or network support, and they become a external arm of their team that they manage on a day-to-day basis. And then the third tier, which is what I think Egbert was really referencing as the really showcase of the ITO scope, is a completely externalized function that as a company, you just pay for that service. And that can be anything from global network operations to full internal, external design of applications and tools, right? i.e., all I need is the end product. How you get there, when you get there, and the way you get there is your problem. All I want is my solution, right? And I think as we look at over the past 5 years, initially there was a lot of managed services and full-on ITO external organizations. I think as the customer interaction has become a bigger priority for companies now, it's turning into a point where people are looking more into the augment model, because you provide the resource, but they are responsible for everything from a strategy, vision, task alignment, and requirement, which is the gap that they can't fulfill right now.
Wow. Well, thanks for that, because there have been other reasons as well to that's propelling this kind of growth. I'll state that the most obvious one, COVID-19 pandemic, right? That kind of thrusted the world into reassessing how it conducts its businesses, embracing more virtual transactions and interactions, which do require an IT type of support in many areas. Cybersecurity comes readily to mind, but I'm sure there's a range of areas. What other reasons have you seen, either of you, that contributes to this growth that we're seeing in ITO? Egbert?
Well, to some extent, here in the Caribbean, the infrastructure has become a lot more available in order to allow or participate in this global change in the IT sector. And we also are positioned where we are in the Caribbean to be, in this whole nearshore reach to the US market as well. So I think the shift from offshore to nearshore, and then having the human capital that we have here that is now able to develop and have these more skilled education in terms of software development or IT infrastructure, so that we are actually becoming a point similar to other markets in the Caribbean, for example, Costa Rica, that has done tremendously in terms of providing IT or services over the last 5 years. So we are now seeing where that demand keeps spilling over from all these countries that have managed this adoption to countries like Jamaica.
Thank you, Egbert. Jaime, your thoughts?
No, I think I agree 100% with Egbert, right? I think the pandemic forced a lot of organizations to look at, number one, a work at home external support model that was not originally in their plan or life map, right? Because of the changes and drastic speed that they were required to occur at, I think what that ended up causing is it forced some organizations to look not just internally, but externally into other support models in order to cover that need, right? Part of that was the large transition to e-commerce that occurred during the pandemic. Yes. And if you look at the macro indicators now, a lot of that has stayed post-pandemic Sure, some habits have returned. Some people still like to do things in person, but there was a very large migration to digital services that has retained close to 70 to 80% of what actually migrated there. With that happening, what ended up occurring is that markets that were originally not as digitally savvy or as highly ranked and placed suddenly had to become that knowledgeable and that savvy within the scope of a very short time. And what that ended up forcing is that it opened up the vision and the outlook of these companies into saying, hey, maybe a market that Jamaica that was not in my pipeline 5 years ago, they were able to transform to 50% work at home during the pandemic and provide advanced services for their companies. So now I need to look at it as, hey, it's in my scope and it's something I need to take into consideration.
That's a good segue to my next question. Does Jamaica have the competitive advantage, Jaime? Do we have the competitive advantage in IT to effectively operate in that space? Do we have the proper talent? Can we keep up with the pace that you're observing globally?
So I think that's a great question. I think the first part is, does Jamaica have the potential to cover it? My answer is absolutely, right? If you look at it from a timeline standpoint, I think we are in the initial phases. All the right steps are being taken. There was a major push by the GSS and the private sector and government organization in Jamaica to start developing this talent pool, investment in the universities, creating curriculums to supply STEMs careers that would eventually support all of these new services that are being offered. And I think that's the first phase, right? Knowledge-based education. Second part is know-how and subject matter expertise, right? There are organizations in Jamaica that have centralized services. So we know there are leaders and managers on the island that can provide these opportunities and this guidance, right? And then the question is, how can we enhance, support, and develop that into a stable structure, right? So in the case of Ibex, in March of this year, we launched Ibex Augment, which is our staff augmentation, ITO, and managed services model for Jamaica. We decided to bet big. We're creating a global network operations hub out of the island, which will have close to 120 engineers by the end of 2023. And what we've done is we're now using our network engineering hub in Asia, which has close to 500 engineers, to cross-feed, cross-pollinate that knowledge base and that know-how into the new developing talent coming out of the universities in Jamaica. So you can mix both the educational knowledge and the practical applications into a successful offering.
That's exciting, Jaime. And I have a few questions on that initiative, in a few minutes. But Egbert, what are your thoughts there? And let me just lead you into the next question as well. What recommendations would you give to training institutions to produce the type of talent you think we need for IT?
So I agree with the points that Jaime made earlier in his answer when it comes to the shift and that we're at the early stage of seeing where we're able to go and that we have the potential. Mm-hmm. I think we need to, at this point, just be very critical in our thinking on what it is that we teach, because we don't have a massive pool of labor force compared to other countries. So we need to, and this is my personal view, is we need to make sure that we have highly trained individuals so that we can offer niche and highly skilled solutions to our clients, right? I think the volume strategy in the ITO sector is not really the one that we will be able to compete in because of our geographic size. So I think when it comes to training, we need to ensure that from now on, we are very critical and including things like cloud architecture design methodologies, AI and data science, right? How to create these data models, how to write algorithms, understand how blockchain functions. We see a lot more central banks now adopting the CBDC blockchain technology. And so this is a technology that is here to stay. Forget the whole crypto side of it. That's a whole separate topic. But the fundamental technology that is driving this in all the fintech, we need to understand and how to utilize it, because we will have to be part of the global financial system as well. So we need to have engineers here that can understand it and ensure that we are part of it, instead of having to import that knowledge.
Right, but so I'm hearing you that our training institutions or universities need to really, reassess their curricula very carefully, and be sure that it is actually reflecting or meeting global demands. But is there a nervousness, gentlemen? Is there a nervousness that our our nationals learn these skills? We have graduates from tertiary institutions perhaps learning these skills, but are not staying in Jamaica, or are not, not being able to be persuaded to be here because there's such a global demand for these skills. There's always that risk. Do you share those sentiments, or do you have a different view?
Go ahead, Jim.
Sure. I think there's three effects to it, right? So absolutely, to Egbert's point, if you compare to like the large IT outsourcing hubs like India or Pakistan, who graduate 1 million engineers a year or 300,000 engineers a year, Jamaica is not going to be able to compete on a scale process, right? But there is definitely emerging technologies where we can take ahead and take a jump, and get to cut to the top of the line, because it is new technology. So as long as we learn it in time, we can become subject matter experts, right? At the same time, Jamaica does have a couple of conditions that make it favorable for certain areas, right? Cybersecurity right now is the biggest concern for most tech organizations, and it's the one thing that never sleeps that everybody has at the back of their head, right? And most of that risk with cybersecurity is associated with social engineering and the impacts that can cause. Social engineering has a direct correlation to language, both cultural nuances, education fluency, pronunciation, and message convection and translation, right? So the fact that Jamaica is culturally aligned to both Canada, the US, and the UK, with close to 25% of their population living in these three countries, makes it the ideal hub for any technology development that's going to tie to it, because they're going to be able to leverage that cultural nuance and that education in a positive way when implemented with the right technical and knowledge skill set, right? Now, once you get them there, how do you keep them, right? And to your point, right now there is a shortage of talent across the pool. If there's one thing about COVID, is that it's made people realize that priorities may not be the right ones or are changing. I always tell the story of my favorite financial controller who decided to quit her job and open a bed and breakfast in Costa Rica, right? And she's a very happy camper, but her priorities changed, and because of the pandemic, and she realized she had other needs and other desires. And because of that, we've seen a massive cultural movement of talent elsewhere, which makes all these companies look for talent in other locations. In order to Jamaica be able to retain this talented workforce pool that's going to compete salaries with the US, Canada, and UK, we need to do a couple of things, right? Number one, create some sort of financial incentives for them for staying on the island, from both attraction of the other Caribbean nations, as Egbert was referencing, and then from staying power, i.e., we've invested 10 years in developing this person and this skill set, right? Let's make sure we give them a good reason to stay, from both a quality of living perspective, a family unit standpoint, and even from a fiscal benefit standpoint, right? And then number three, leverage that staying talent for replication, right? A lot of these services require certifications, curriculums, diplomas in order to provide effective service, right? The cost of this service is very expensive, right? So how can we as a private sector cover a lot of those costs for them with contracts that allow our employees to stay and take advantage of that over time, so that it doesn't come out of their pocket, But at the same time as the private sector, we leverage being able to keep that talent and invest in it in the future for the long-term vision.
Thank you, Jaime. Let me let Egbert answer, and then I have a question based on something you just said. Please, Egbert, your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, the concerns are valid. It's, we've seen it, and especially now through COVID, we do see that, as Jaime said, people decide to go in a completely separate direction, and we've seen it. We also seen people that have just burned out and decided, you know what, I'm done. I'm going to do something completely different. Not particularly nervous over it at this point, because at the same time because we're working on enlarging that talent pool, especially now with the GSS and the apprenticeship programs that are coming on, where the companies are taking part of assisting in the educational part through practical applications. Combined with the theoretical knowledge provided by the educational sector, I think it will help to create more of a belonging and cultural, like company culture, from early on, to allow us to keep, and as Jaime said, make it a place where you want to be, where you want to work, where you see the benefits of working in a team. And when you foster that through these apprenticeship programs and have people staying with you in the company, I think that will alleviate some of these concerns of people leaving the island. Mm-hmm. And yeah, financial incentives, training incentives in particular, those are, if you're able to offer those as a company and also are there for the employee, I think it really comes down to understanding that as a private company, you need to start to think a lot more about the welfare of your workforce. Now that we've seen, we've all been confronted with COVID over the last 2 years and how it affected health. And I think as companies, we want to ensure now that not just output is provided through efficiencies, but also by providing the necessary welfare. If you look at, for example, the GSAJ just came out with supports for the sector of paternity leave, right? That's something new as well. But again, it helps with the cultural that you're forming within your organization, right? And I think those, even though they might seem small, all of these little steps are important to individuals to make their decisions.
Thanks, Egbert. But, and I hear you, and I do agree with you that when someone's welfare is taken into account, companies or firms that do that well and do that consistently do tend to keep their workforce, do tend to have lower attrition rates than other firms that may not take that as seriously. But there is also that sentiment that, this is not a generation, or the workforce that we serve, for example, through the GSS, is not a workforce that takes loyalty very seriously. So, it makes me think, Jaime, that when you mention that, certification can be expensive, but that the suggestion is that firms could make this investment, could, defray or subsidize some of these costs in the interest of having the types of skills that you need for areas such as ITO. Do you ever have a concern that after investing so much that you may still lose your workers, or is it just worked in as a calculated business risk? Do you need to consider bonding them? I know it's a term used more in government, but is that something to be entertained at all? How would you respond to that?
Right. So from a philosophy standpoint, I always take one approach, right? And it's an old saying, and remember, this came all the way from my dad when he was trying to educate me on my first job in the professional sector, right? And I remember I asked him, it's like, hey, I'm getting my first mentee. I'm supposed to develop them, but already my workload is very high and I don't have this time. And he said, like, what if I invest all this time in this person and then they leave? And his response was to me, and it's an old saying, it's like, well, what happens if you don't and they stay, right? And then you have someone who's not able to provide adequate services because they weren't taught well and they weren't educated, right? I honestly think, and a lot of nations have agreements with this, where companies subsidize education, tertiary certifications and processes, and there's either reimbursement or duration of contracts, and that's pretty standard in most industries. So I think Jamaica should definitely align with the rest of the OECD countries within that standpoint. But at the same time, if you look at our organization, we gave 25 scholarships for tertiary education last year from within employees, right? At free and no cost. These are top performers, people that want to do better. They just need the right path and the way to do it. And it's something that's always going to give back. Now, over time, will all of them stay? Probably not, right? Maybe our company was not right for them. Maybe they look for a new sector or opportunity. Maybe their priorities changes, as we were talking about earlier, right? But most of them will stay, and that skill set will then help you get to the next level, right? And I think as the IT industry, from both the ITO and the outsourcing sector develops in Jamaica, and it becomes a very competitive career opportunity, because at this point, there's really only two sectors within Central Latin America that allow you to move up 4 tiers in the economic scale within 5 years. One is banking, the other one is outsourcing. And so once people see that from a return of investment, both fiscally, developmentally, and then from a career planning standpoint, it really helps retain your people for you, because they see that, hey, if I invest in myself, whether that's with education or with the company, I am going to have an ROI that's going to pay out for the rest of our lives, right? And I think one of the things I'm the most proud of say, our company in Jamaica, is that out of the 22 directors that are based on island, 17 of them have been promoted into their position.
That is awesome.
Yeah. And I think that showcases that if you give people the right way in career and opportunity, why wouldn't you stay, right? As long as there's a future for me and my family and everything I represent.
And that's a really refreshing approach, and it is something I've heard across the GSS, where the focus is on investing and really almost taking on that corporate responsibility to upskill your workers for the long-term gains, and not just long-term in the interest of the firms, but also for themselves. This is why the GSS project itself promotes #lifelong learning, because we want the 50-odd thousand workers, as well as those who are aspiring, to understand that you can have an active role in how you upskill and position yourself for opportunities, regardless of which space within the GSS that you wish to work in. That there are many opportunities. There are even now opportunities for certifications. And, to your point, Jaime, many of the firms in the GSS are willing to pay for certification, are willing to explore, how they can support persons to be upskilled. So that's really good to know. So I'm going to dispel any fears or notions of persons leaving then, because there are too many compelling reasons to work in the GSS. Egbert, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. Sometimes we as companies look at attrition as something bad, right? Because it affects us as a business. But I think sometimes we shouldn't look at it in a bad way, because in a way, all of us, as long as we provide training, it's almost like we're a filter, right? Because we have someone new coming in that gets trained, but someone else might leave and go somewhere else, but they have attained knowledge and move on. So in the end of the day, even if that's the case, and we're training anyways, right? What we do is we build the nation, because we help push people through our learning experience. They gain knowledge and experience, and even if they go somewhere else, they will still apply that knowledge. So overall, if we are this filter that filters people through our training, it has a long-term effect on the nation as well. So I think sometimes we need to look on the bigger picture rather than just how it affects us for the next couple of months until we have the proper replacement.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I've always looked at the talent pool that we're trying to build as a kind of funnel. So if we talk about, what we need in terms of ITO skills, I would say to our tertiary institutions, to our training institutions, that we need to be churning out so many graduates in these areas, so many persons with these skill sets, that we have a consistent flow through the pipeline. As persons are promoted, even if they leave, there are other persons who will come up through that pipeline in different skills at the different tiers. I mean,
Yeah.
we see that, yes, with the apprenticeship program that focuses on that cross-functional skill sets of supervisory management, where we see persons who started out just on the production floor moving now into areas of leadership, into areas of supervisory management. But similarly with the technical skills, to your earlier point about India, whilst we can't, Jaime, compete at that scale, we can have a more concerted effort to have persons in that skill sets coming out, knowing that there are opportunities for employment, knowing that there are opportunities to use their skills with confidence, and having a better response, I think, from tertiary institutions in getting more graduates in these areas as well.
No, yeah, I could not agree more, Marjorie. And I think that starts at the grassroots level. Once people are already in college or in tertiary education, it's a lot easier to fold them towards that specific niche market that we were referencing before, as far as development or career plan opportunities, right? I think we really have a lot of work to do, and this is an ongoing struggle, and I don't think it's something we're going to be able to fix today, tomorrow. It's really going to be a 5-10 year plan. Is how do we get the younger population, the ones that are still in the educational phase or their primary or secondary, to start thinking that long term into where they want to go, and to encourage them into the STEM sciences, because we know that is going to have both the best ROI for them as far as opportunities, both labor and financially, and then as the private sector, as most of the services continue to get digitalized, because we know that's where most of the requirement of talent pool is going to happen, right? Especially on the ITO space, which is, if you look at it from a growth perspective, one of the largest growing sectors worldwide, percentage-wise, and most importantly, outside of the really developed nations, where you can make the largest impact on the local social dynamic, right?
Right, thank you. And I do think we have to do a better job of communicating what are the opportunities to support that long-term thinking, but not just directly to our target audience or target groups, ages 18 or to 35, or just anyone who wants to come into that space, but also our training institutions or school systems as well. Egbert, I'll give you any last comments on that point before we move on with our discussion.
Well, I was just thinking, you asked us earlier how concerned we are about, trained people leaving the island. If you look at, for example, there's some statistics that came out that after COVID, somewhere around 20,000 students didn't show back up in the high schools. That's a much more alarming problem to me to hear about than if you would tell me 20,000 people migrated.
Yes. There definitely have been some serious consequences as well to our educational system as a result of COVID. Gentlemen, before we talk about the job opportunities, could you, in your own words, summarize what you think are the challenges to capitalizing on the potential growth of the ITO? Egbert, I'll ask you to just go first.
Let me think about this for a little bit, if I can.
All right, Jaime, over to you.
Fair enough. So the way we're looking at it, I think there's a couple of things, right? Number one is the cost of certifications, right? If you look at the cost of the top 5 Cisco Global Network Operation certifications in Jamaica, they're close to $10,000 US higher per person than it is the cost in, say, in India, which is the largest GNOC operating hub in the world, right? Part of that is because the lack of availability from a talent pool perspective, i.e. there's only so many engineers that are certified that can certify other engineers. And part is because of an aggregate margin standpoint, i.e. I'm going to make 100% of my cost and profit, right? I think we need to start looking less at a per instance and more at a scale. Is it better to get 100% out of 10 people or to get 25% out of 500, right? And I think we need to pivot a little bit because in the long run, it's going to be in everybody's best interest if we create a deep niche and a big enough talent pool to make it happen, right? We covered a little bit on the migration and the talent retention, right? But even if we take away the moving outside of the island, right? On average, for most of these technical jobs, there's between a 90-day to 180-day period of mentorship and adjustment required in order to be successful, right? I think we need to, within Jamaica, start building that expectation, right? That once you get into more complex labor areas, you can't get promoted within 3 months or 6 months or a year, right? Knowledge takes time. Expertise takes time, right? And I think is this more of a private sector? There's got to be educational sessions on road mapping, career planning as part of the onboarding process for these employees, so they understand that, hey, to get where they want to go, it's going to take 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever the requirement is, right? And I think that's very critical. And then finally, I think we need to, as a nation, sponsor the career developments that we want, right? And this is for the scale referencing you were mentioning earlier, right? I can't tell you off the top of my head what is the cost of a liberal arts degree in UWI, but I can tell you what the cost is of a different tech degree in the Tech College of Jamaica. But what I can tell you is that if we want everybody to take an engineering degree, we need to make taking an engineering degree appealing.
Exactly.
And that means we need to reduce the cost of that degree versus the other degrees. That means we need to find some sort of benefits that we can add for the people that take this career path instead of the other one, right? There's got to be some clear incentivization to make it happen. And I think on a partnership standpoint, we need to have pre-organized opportunities for those that are on their second, third year from an internship and mentorship development standpoint that we were referencing earlier, so that when they're in that point, and we all have that point in university or in college where we're like, oh, did I make the right decision? Is this going to be the right career for me, right? So that they see a very clear professional path towards success in partnership with talent development of their skill set.
Right. Thank you, Jaime. Egbert?
Yeah, no, I agree with what Jaime is saying. And I think to some extent, maybe also what we need to become a little better at is educating on these career paths, as Jaime was saying. So for example, if you think, you want to get into software development and you start being a junior developer and you move up to a senior developer and so on. From an industry or from a company standpoint, I wouldn't want you to be a developer for the entire time you're working, right? There will come the time where for us as a business, we want to promote you into middle management, right? Because you have this knowledge of software development and you've been through it. You are a more capable candidate for a project manager role or a team manager role than someone that doesn't have that software background, right? Because it's going to be very hard for someone that doesn't understand the technical intricacies. And it goes across a lot of these creative jobs like video editing and so on. You need to have someone in middle management that actually has been an editor before, right? Because you need to understand how to help your team to grow and how to motivate them over and over. So, and you can only do that if you have that skill set yourself. So we need to be able to say, oh, come into the ITO sector and you start as a software developer. But the career path can be that one day you actually manage a team of software developers, you overlook a project, you're interacting with the client, and so that they see that there's a path, right?
Yeah, I think that's such an important point because so many persons that I've interacted with through the project, do not appreciate the role of soft skills with technical skills. So here we are today talking about, the growth, the potential of the ITO. But that's an important point to make, which is that you need the technical skills, of course. You need the cybersecurity, the data analytics, and all these technical skills. But if you intend to grow in your role, if you intend to take on managerial role, project management roles, you need soft skills, you need, transferable skills, and I suppose this is why training like the supervisory management was so well received. But you need to be able to manage people. You need to have the troubleshooting on the technical side, but apply the softer skills as you manage teams and get the best, out of teams and learn how to optimize teams. So I think that's an important point because I think many times, especially, we say techies think that all they don't need people skills. They just need to come in and do their programming or do whatever that technical skill is and forget how important it is for the people skills and the soft skills. We're almost out of time. So I just want to turn our discussion a little bit to the career pathway framework because on our site, which is mygsscareerpathway.gov.jm, there are certain job groups that were identified in the ITO career path. And this initiative was done by the GSS to support persons who want to work in the GSS to understand the different job roles. And so under ITO, we have, for example, cybersecurity, enterprise architecture and network infrastructure. We have software and applications, and even, development and strategy and government. And we encourage persons to use the CPF because it will give one a very good sense of the types of job roles out there. We try to give you a sense of the salary range and the training requirements as well. And you can even do a self-assessment. You might think you're a good fit for ITO and then suddenly hear that perhaps not such a good fit for ITO. Why don't you consider knowledge process outsourcing? And you have access to our career advisors. So, you said earlier, Jaime, understanding that roadmap, which is how one of the ways in which a CPF can help, or understanding that pathway that one needs to take and having that long-term view can help one to build the necessary skills to compete effectively in the space, to offer your skill sets in the space, excuse me. And so Jaime, I wanted to just ask you, because you had shared with us recently and you made reference to it earlier when we opened this session, about your Global Network Operations Center. And you had shared with me that the CPF had sort of helped you, influenced, your decision there to some extent. We're not going to take credit for it though, but do you mind sharing it with us a little bit?
No, absolutely not. It's my pleasure, Marjorie. So absolutely. Definitely the career pathing framework was one of the leading indicators that this was we were on the right path and this was a good idea. When we looked at our company internally, like all other companies during the pandemic, we started realizing possible risks of lack of redundancy and business continuity plans in the case of major events and situations, right? And we made a strategic decision to diversify and create redundant centers for global network operations. Within that scope, obviously, we looked at markets that could support the talent pool, that would have the graduates and requirements to be able to be successful, and do it in a way that met our timelines and requirements. This is also tied with our previously referenced ITO services offering that we wanted to entail, right? So in order to build a successful hub to offer those services out of Jamaica, there were certain things that we knew our clients were going to be requesting. Number one was talent pool proof point, i.e., yes, you're telling me this is there in the book, but is it there in reality, right? Number two, capacity, both infrastructure, sustainment, and then of course the actual proof of concept is, have you done it before and is it successful, right? And so we figured it was going to take a lot of proof of faith to get a company that's never outsourced to Jamaica before to suddenly decide to outsource the ITO segmentation to us in a location that it's not widely known for being an ITO hub, right? So we figured first we needed to prove our own hypothesis, which is the career framing path work is effective and does work, right? So we decided to create our own global network operations hub in Jamaica, supporting our own services globally, then transition that over time from an internal Ibex only support to outsource ITO service support for other companies. That way we would have, number one, a proof of concept, number two, the subject matter expertise and know-how that we could cross-pollinate across the different support services that we offered. And then number three, a clear career path guiding framework that if somebody joined our team could see, hey, I could start here, but then I could grow into internal support. I could do advanced services for customers to help with retention and talent development and over time building the necessary skill set on island. Because like with almost every really skill, you need a critical mass option. It's really hard to create a concept with one or two people, but everything starts with one or two people, right?
Yes, yes.
So we needed to have a very clear trajectory of what the end game was. And as a company, we needed to make the decision to take that investment. We're investing close to $5 million in our new center. And the idea is because we believe in the sector, we believe in Jamaica, and we believe in it being the right career plan to showcase to then our partners that we're offering our services to and showcase, hey, if we're willing to do this for us, we're most definitely willing to do it for you, right?
Well, we applaud that initiative, Jaime. Thank you for sharing that. Egbert, let's put on your GSSC chairman hat for a minute and share with our audience why did the GSSC endorse an initiative like the Career Pathway Framework? What was the thinking behind introducing such a tool to Jamaica?
Well, as a group of individuals that are coming out of the private sector and also from having worked in Jamaica and in the sector for the last 15 years, a lot of operators that are part of the group, the sector itself was able to shape this career path plan and basically understand how the implementation will be beneficial to the individuals and to the companies themselves. So it's something that has grown out of need, but at the same time in a strategic manner. It was done with thought processes involved, with actually getting it in line with how it actually makes sense from a business standpoint, rather than just someone that comes into a sector. So the overall process was definitely designed to be effective, and I think we're seeing these effects coming through now.
Great. Thank you, Egbert. All right, gentlemen, we are running out of time. So I think I have time for maybe one question. And I have a question here, which is, how can a small business effectively compete on a global scale to offer IT services? Egbert, do you want to give a stab? Put you on the spot real quick.
That is a very, very good question. And that is one of the questions that you ask yourself as a small business owner all the time. The most important thing is, if you know your talent and if you are able to apply yourself to your customers' problems, it doesn't matter if you're a big company or a small one. But if you can, get one client, showcase what you've done for that client, and really be active in self-promoting that you have the experience and that you have worked with companies, that you have provided solutions to companies, that is the only thing that will help you grow beyond your shores, so to say. We have the internet, so you're able to promote yourself globally now, but you have to do it effectively. And I think that the only way to do it effectively is if you can showcase success that you've provided for others.
Right. Thank you. And I find that sometimes to scale, our IT firms do not understand the importance of collaborating. You know, that there's enough in the pie, and sometimes you need to partner with another IT firm to take advantage of a
Yeah,
particular project.
if you look at it in Jamaica, there are several IT firms, but to some extent, it's funny. If you look granularly, we all do have certain subgroups that we are all in, because we all have a certain expertise in one area that might be slightly different from another one. So there are definitely a lot of opportunities to collaborate, because, well, maybe one has a super good development team, but the other one is really good at quality assurance, or you have another one that is more specialized in cloud design. So, and on the bigger projects, you know, taking everybody's strengths and weaknesses and combine them, I think there's definitely options to collaborate more.
Right. And Jaime, I mean, what do you look for? You know, across your jurisdictions, I'm sure you see IT firms in all shapes and sizes. What stands out, or what would you recommend they do in terms of scaling at a certain level? I think you're on mute, Jaime.
Sorry about that. I think there's 2 points. And to Egbert's and what he was mentioning, it is okay to not be able to do everything, right? And that, I think, is the one mistake as you're starting a small organization and you're growing that, right? And I always reference our story on Island. You know, when I started with Ibex, we were 350 people. We have 8,000 employees now, right? At the beginning, we didn't sign up for everything because we knew we didn't have the expertise, the knowledge base, and the capacity to do everything. So when you're starting out as a business, don't try to be a jack of all trades, right? Learn one skill and become the best at it. Make it so that it becomes a no-brainer into why would people pick you, right? Because at that standpoint, you're not going to be able to reference a lot of cross-skill know-how, subject matter expertise from global teams, external input and management, tiger support from global operations leaders, right? So you really need to showcase how, hey, there's nothing that can beat you at what you do well. And then as you start to scale, then you start opening up that umbrella, right? You start adding more points and more services and more offerings that you can cross leverage that initial fantastic expertise or subject matter knowledge that made you successful in the first place, right? There's a really good book that I'm a fan of called The Pursuit of Zero, right? And it talks about how everybody wants to have zero errors, be able to do everything, but the reality is it's an ever-ending goal. You're never going to get to zero, right? What you have to do is just diminish the number little by little, understanding that when you get to the end, it's going to be percentage of a percentage point, but it's still never going to be zero. You're never going to be able to do absolutely everything, right? And I think the advice for all these companies trying to scale is absolutely that, right? Play to your strengths, leverage those, and then start adding skill sets, whether internally or externally, right? Make sure that every new person that you hire adds something new that you didn't have yet.
Great. Yes, Egbert, go ahead.
And if you have a potential client where you know you can provide one expertise, go and find someone to work with to provide the rest of the needed expertise. Don't be afraid to ask for help or to collaborate with someone else and share the project. And I speak out of my own experience with that. We recently had an international company approach us to work on a new platform that they require. but at the same time, they also required marketing and brand skills to be part of it. Now, obviously, we don't provide any of those skills. Other companies might or might be more better suited for the branding part, but they also play the same game and say, well, we also offer some development. But in the end of the day, we know obviously companies that our clients use, that others use, that complement our workflow, right? So we were able to come together with another company that has an expertise in branding and marketing, and then we presented together, and that's how we were able to get the project. So don't be afraid of collaborating and working with others so that you can utilize it on each other's skills.
Great, Egbert. Thank you. Well, Jaime, Egbert, we are almost at the end of our session. I really want to thank both of you for taking the time to share your perspectives. You're both very, very familiar with this industry, operating in it on a daily basis. And if I had to summarize, in terms of key takeaways, I think what I hear in terms of how do we get the pipeline going, how do we get a steady, consistent pipeline of skills to support the ITO sector, then we might need to have governments and relevant agencies consider some kind of incentive for persons to do their degrees in STEM, for persons to have incentives to do degrees, to come out, to graduate as engineers or in computer science, and then, to look at large-scale internship programs that will help to build the skills and decrease that gap between being a recent graduate and understanding exactly how the world works in terms of ITO, understanding the practicality of applying those skills. Those two could really be very helpful. Obviously, firms that are able to support certification and to continue to upskill their workers is welcome. And we also encourage individuals out there to take charge, of your own career path. There are more and more tools out there that are available to you. The career pathway framework is one of the more recent ones, but there are other tools to guide you. There are many courses you can do, and certification in some cases is not as expensive until you build your skills. So we encourage you for that lifelong learning. We encourage you to take charge of your skill sets. I just want to invite our guests who have been listening to send in your questions or feedback to communications_GSS@jamprocorp.com. We'd love to hear your comments. Please do not hesitate to make suggestions in terms of any topics you'd like us to speak on or to have guests to come on and present on. And I really want to thank both of you again for your participation and the continued support that I know you give to the GSS project and all that we're trying to do for the workforce of the global services sector. Thank you and have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.